Chazar Mashiach topics. Today as well we'll deal with two messianic figures, Shlomo Molcho and David Reuveni. One thing fascinating about these two individuals is that there's pretty much no consensus if we're dealing with saints or scoundrels, if we're dealing with potential messianists or master manipulators. Depending on which book you pick up, you'll find different takes on our story. David Reuveni hits the world stage in 1524. He arrives in Venice, and he introduces himself as a king. He's a king of 300,000 Jewish soldiers who were all remnants of the 2.5 Shvatim, Reuven, Gad, and the half Shevet of Menashe. And he's part of a secret kingdom. His father's name was Shlomo. He himself, Dovid, although he's called Reuveni, it's kind of amazing. Some people devoted PhD theses for these people. According to most, his name was not Reuveni, meaning Reuveni, the term Reuveni, was just given to him because he appeared. And when he appears, since he says he's the king of 300,000 remnants, Gad, Reuven, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, the largest being Reuven, so therefore he's given the moniker Reuveni. However, he himself claimed that his name, as you can imagine, being Dovid, and his father's name Shlomo, so he's a descendant of Dovid ben Yishai. Now, obviously, that's critical in our story because if he has any sort of messianic aspirations, obviously it's a prerequisite that he's part of the Davidic family. Remember, according to the Rambam, delineates the 13 principles of faith. Belief in the Jewish Messiah is predicated not only in belief that it comes from the Davidic line, and the Rambam specifically writes that it's Dovid's son Shlomo who out of his ancestors comes the Mashiach. For our purposes, he appears on the scene in 1524. His diary begins much earlier, and basically the idea is that this man, he states that he's from a place called Chavor. Now Chavor, we already know in the Tanakh, that according to one pasuk in the Tanakh and according to references in Chazal, the 2.5 Shvatim, we know that the 2.5 Shvatim ended up on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. The West Bank is what usually makes the headlines, but actually the Eastern Bank, which currently is the Hashmonite Kingdom of Jordan, is also part of the Promised Land, albeit seemingly it wasn't made for habitation, but perhaps for vegetation. But nevertheless, we're all familiar, we just learned it in the two parashiyos of Matas Maseh, that of course that Gad, Reuven, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, those 2.5 Shvatim requested permission to reside on the eastern bank of the Jordan. Moshe granted them permission, provided that they were the vanguard to conquering the land. And therefore, these 2.5 Shvatim that reside on the eastern bank, they're already somewhat separate from the rest of Klal Yisrael. And as I mentioned, there is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim which seems to reference that they're going to be living in this place called Chavor. Where this place Chavor is not clear, but that seems to be where they are. Now, who is this man, David Reuveni? Since we don't know where this place Chavor is, so honestly, and why is this person writing in this book that is called The Diary of a Black Jewish Messiah, different hypothesis of where this person comes from. Some people claim he's an Ashkenazi Jew. Other people claim he's from one of the Romance countries. Other people claim that he was from Ethiopia, which is how the black person comes in. There are some people who claim to have seen him, and they write that he was Shachor Kikushi. He was black like a Kushi. The word Kushi generally is understood to mean a black person from Africa, an Abyssinian, an Ethiopian, a person from the depths of Africa. English translation was Diary of a Black Messiah. This book, it's not rated G, it's not rated X, somewhere between the PG-13 and R. I don't know if they still have those ratings, but it's an interesting book. There's a lot of things going on there. There's stuff with women going on there, some stuff with men going on there. It's basically a travelogue. Most of the book really has nothing to do with our story. Most of the book, he, for whatever reason, he disguises himself as a Muslim when he goes through the Muslim lands. Interestingly enough, by the way, I happened to notice in today's news that, for whatever it's worth, that the Israeli Minister of Police of Interior, Mr. Ben-Gvir, actually conducted an open public prayer service on the Temple Mount today. And according to Israeli police officials, it was a record number of Jews visited the Temple Mount. Again, in other venues, I've discussed the halachic permissibility or advisability of a Jew entering the Temple Mount today. I'm not going to review that today. But suffice to say that somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 Jews frequented the Temple Mount today on Tisha B'Av. And like I said, there is actually, I have to admit, I saw it myself. You can watch a video of Mr. Ben-Gvir leading Chazaras HaShatz in full view on the Temple Mount. Why do I mention that? Because Dovid Reuveni, interestingly enough, in his travelogue, wherever he's coming from, Chavor, wherever that is, he visits Egypt, and then he visits the Eretz Yisrael, he visits the land of Israel. And in that he explains that one of the reasons he has disguised as a Muslim, which is fascinatingly interesting as it does relate to today, I'm sure many of us are familiar with the fact that beginning with the Ottoman Empire, going way back, a Jew was not ever permitted to pray on the Temple Mount. You're allowed to pray at the Vatican. There's no problem if a Jew put on talis and tefillin on the Vatican. No one will stop you. In fact, they'll be more than happy to probably assist you. And you can go to St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue in New York City with your talis and tefillin, and they'll be most welcoming. But if you try to go to Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and you hold halachically your permitted temple, the Temple Mount, you're not allowed to pray. Allowed to visit. If you're a Catholic or a Protestant, the same rules apply. I think as long as if you're not a Muslim, you're not allowed to pray, and that's part of the status quo that Mr. Ben-Gvir and others are trying to change. But I mention that as well because he also visits Maras Machpelah, which was also restricted Muslim prayer ground, which Jews were restricted to the famous seventh step. The seventh step, don't try to go to that seventh step because you won't find it anymore. After the 6-Day War, it was blown up. Some say by Moshe Dayan, some say by others. Whatever the reason is, you can see old pictures. There was a stairwell outside the Maras Machpelah, an alternate stairwell which no longer exists, which you can see the remnants of it. You can see where there's still people who pray where it was to this day, and you can see the charred wall where many people lit yahrzeit candles there. But he also, in his desire to pray at the Maras Machpelah, he does disguise himself as a Muslim, if that's the reason of his disguise, whatever it is. His descriptions, both of Temple Mount and Maras Machpelah, are quite detailed and quite accurate. He arrives in Italy in 1524 in the city of Venice, and he immediately asks to meet with the Jewish community there. And of course he claims, now if he claims he's the son of Solomon, the son of Shlomo, the king of Chavor, who has 300,000 vanguard fighting soldiers, Golani soldiers ready to do battle, his brother Yosef is now the king. Achiv Hagadol Yosef, Yarashes HaMelucha, his older brother Yosef is now head and he's chief of staff, the general. He has his hand out for money. That he's asking for money is not so strange, though, but the fact that he's the head of a country, how does he lose his money if he's such a great man? So he said he's been robbed, tricked. In fact, if you read his diary, it's full of all these intrigues of getting his money stolen. This person ripped him off, that person. The Kitzer, he's obviously a charismatic figure because he convinces the Jewish community of Venice, which happens to be quite a wealthy community, they're a merchant community, of basically supporting him. And they supply him with an entourage, they supply him with all his needs, they put him up in nice homes. Everything is very great there. And he says right away that his mission, of course, is to get from Venice to Rome. He must meet with the Pope. That's his most important thing, is to meet with the Pope. What's his reason for meeting with the Pope? That the Pope should give him permission, letters of endorsement, that he should be given ships and ammunition, high-tech ballistic missiles, because he's going to make war against the Muslim empire, and he's going to join forces with the Christian forces, and they're going to liberate the Holy Land from the infidels. At this point, the Ottoman Empire is in control of the Holy Land, and therefore he has to personally meet with the Pope. When he arrives there, though, he has messianic aspirations. The two languages that he only claims that he speaks is Hebrew and Arabic, which would make sense if he's coming from some sort of Muslim land or some sort of wherever Chavor is, somewhere near Jeddah. Jeddah is the closest port in Saudi Arabia actually to Mecca. That's more or less the assumption or that's where he wanted to go, and perhaps that's also where he was from, but that's generally the assumption. And he claims to only speak Hebrew and Arabic, and he goes ahead, and at one point, before he gets the Venetian community supporting him, I can't remember, this is 1524, 1525, he gets sick, and people are very concerned, is he going to fulfill his mission? And he says the following, Lo emos mizeh hacholi, ad asher akabetz Yerushalayim, ve'evneh hamizbeach, ve'akriv hakorban. He says, don't worry, I will not be sick from this sickness, for I am going to gather the ingathering into Jerusalem, and I will rebuild the altar, the Mizbeach, and I will bring a sacrifice. So actually, it's quite clear that his messianic aspirations are quite explicit in what he says. He does get to Rome and he does meet with the Pope. But interesting, one of the Venetian Jews, one of his major supporters, is a woman by the name of Benvenita Abarbanel. Now, you may be familiar with the name Abarbanel. In fact, we mentioned him this morning in keynotes, Yitzchok Abarbanel. Well, generally, the book says Don Yitzchok, but Don or Don it's a title. It's a title, not a proper name. Yitzchok Abarbanel was, of course, the great Portuguese financier and Rav who, after things got difficult in Portugal, made his way to Spain. And of course, on Tisha B'Av in 1492, when the Jews were expelled, convert to Christianity, leave Spain, and he makes his way to Italy. He had the brother Yaakov. And Yaakov has a daughter. Yaakov's daughter is Benvenita. A famous Abarbanel, Don Yitzchok Abarbanel, has a son, Shlomo, as was quite common among the higher echelons of European life. Honestly, may still be common in some Hasidic circles as well. Benvenita Abarbanel, Abarbanel's niece, marries her first cousin, meaning Abarbanel's youngest son, Shlomo. She's already the Abarbanel's niece. She now becomes the Abarbanel's daughter-in-law. The Abarbanel family is a very wealthy family. Even when they're in Italy, they're a very wealthy family. They always, at the end of the day, they say Don Yitzchok actually lost money, but she was a wealthy family. She was a high society woman, and she was one of the personal supporters of Dovid Reuveni. She supplies him with horses, with an entourage, with white horses, with silk robes, with silk turbans. She also supplies him with flags. And you're going to see that flags figure highly, are mentioned quite often in our story. Jewish flags that have on them the Aseres HaDibros, flags which have on them Maccabi, Mi Kamocha Belim Hashem, Jewish flags, and he has his cape and his silk garments are full of all types of Jewish insignias and Jewish paraphernalia. She makes sure that he's well dressed and that everything in his life is the way it should be. She's one of his major supporters. And indeed, he reaches Rome. And we reach Rome, we get to our second character that appears on stage after David Reuveni, and that's Pope Clement VII. Pope Clement VII. Pope Clement VII will be one of our I'm not going to say our hero, but he's not going to be such a bad guy either. He lives 1423, 1534. He's the Pope for 11 years. This Pope is actually interestingly unique. You'll see that he has a full beard. The reason he had a full beard, and this is going to be part of our story, although I'm jumping ahead, but it's coming attractions. It's not a spoiler alert either. But in 1527, Rome is sacked. Rome is sacked in 1527, and we'll figure in our story very soon. And when he was exiled out of Rome, he had to go to one of the other palaces that the Pope had access to. And it's interesting, during his half year of imprisonment in 1527, Clement VII grew a full beard as a sign of mourning for the sack of Rome. This was in contradiction to Catholic canon law. In fact, one of the reasons in Yiddish we call a priest a galach. A galach means a shaved one. That's what the word galach means, shaved one. In Yiddish, he's a galach, meaning he's megulach, he's shaved, because as we know, Pope Leo and the other guy, Pope Francis, and all the other popes that we may have heard of, they're always megulach, they're always clean-shaven. But it's interesting to note that Clement VII, similarly to our religion, after Rome was sacked, in a contradiction to Catholic canon law, which required priests to be clean-shaven, he went into Avelis after Rome was sacked in 1527. And even though he returns to Rome about a year later, he keeps his beard until his death in 1534. And interesting enough, his example in wearing a beard was followed by his successor, Paul III, and by 24 popes after him, up to Innocent XII in the year 1700. So we have from 1527, for almost 200 years, till 1700, all of the popes had nice big beards until Innocent went back to the original minhag. He was a literalist, and he went back to canon law and went back to Megullah. That we just add as a little bit of a tidbit. But anyway, he went to Clement VII. He was a Medici. Medici was a very prominent Italian family. They were much better than a lot of the other Roman families that were not so nice people. He was pretty decent. And again, now, it's very important that you understand the background of what's going on in the world right now. The world is really in sort of a shambles. What I mean to say is that the Ottoman Empire is extremely powerful. The Ottoman Empire, besides ruling the whole Levant, the whole Middle East, it stretches quite a bit, and actually it went all the way into Europe. There was a famous siege of Vienna, takes place 1529 or so. Around that time there was a famous siege of Vienna, and where the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire, Muslims were on the move, and there was a lot of fear. There was a tremendous fear going on that the Muslims would go ahead and they would basically pave the way into Germany, France, and Europe. The whole story would have been different. Huge confrontation going on in the beginning part of the 16th century, in the 1520s, between the Muslim Empire, which is the Ottoman Empire, and the Christian Empire, which is the European Empire. Now, before I get to that, I just want to give you an idea just what's going on in the Jewish world at the time. Most of you here are familiar with the fact that since we're dealing with 1525, that in 1492 Jews were expelled out of Spain. The Jews were expelled out of England in 1290, for like hundreds of years. So much later they weren't let back in. They were expelled from all of France in 1306. They're expelled, as I mentioned, from Spain in 1492. Expulsions in southern Italy, and many other places in Germany as well. Germany wasn't a united country that the Jews are expelled from. The Jews are really, unfortunately, going through a very difficult time. I mentioned before Benvenuto Barbanel. 1524, 1525, Benvenuto became a supporter and patron of the mystic and false messiah David Reuveni, whom she sent money and a silk banner embroidered with the Ten Commandments. Reuveni's travel diary mentions Benvenuto with praise, stating she fasted daily, ransomed 1,000 captives, was known for her charity. She was a patron of scholarship, donating money to supporting the printing of books to provide for scholars. And as I mentioned, he himself, in his travel log, he mentions her. She's definitely Zachor Latov. He calls her, by the way, he calls her the Signora of Naples. The Signora of Naples sent me a beautiful antique silk flag to me in Pisa, inscribed with the Decalogue in 2 columns and decorated with gold. Now, those of you who are familiar with the writings of the Abarbanel, especially not just his trilogy on Mashiach, whatever, Yeshua's Molcho, I forget all 3 words, the 3 Sfarim, they're similar. More specifically, his Perush on Daniel. Now, obviously, he wasn't a pro-Christian guy. He lived in Christian Europe his whole life. It wasn't fun. I mean, he gets kicked out of Portugal, gets kicked out of Spain. 1535, when he dies, he's buried somewhere there in Italy. Like the next year, there's some sort of war. No one knows where his bones are buried. Some sort of plaque somewhere. But he really had not a great life with the Christians. If you read his Perush on Daniel, you'll see there that he refers to the Muslims as Mashiach, as messianic. That this war of the world's going on, what does this remind you of when you have 2 huge empires? The Muslim Empire, which is coming from the Levant, is heading northward into Europe. The Catholic Empire just finished the reconquest of Spain and have ejected the Muslims back southward into the Levant. But you have these 2 huge forces fighting against each other. So what does that remind you of? It can only mean one thing. Gog and Magog. This is Armageddon. This is Gog and Magog. This is Mashiach Zeit. This is time of Mashiach. And honestly, there are those who claim, and not without cause, that this Dovid Reuveni, whatever he was and whoever he was, preached 2 messages. He preached to the Jews that he was actually going to use this ammunition and this stuff to actually cause the Muslims to defeat the Christians. Because remember, the Muslims had all of the Balkan states were in Muslim hands at this time. We're talking about Bulgaria, we're talking about Macedonia, we're talking about Greece, we're talking about parts of the Ukraine, we're talking about Moldova, we're talking about parts of Hungary, we're talking about Serbia, we're talking about Bosnia and Yugoslavia, Croatia, Slovenia. All these places were in the hands of the Muslims. The whole southern Europe, not Italy and Spain not, but the whole southern part of Europe were in the hands of the Muslims. And like I said, they moved, they were at the gates of Vienna, which is the gateway to the Iker of Europe, which of course is Germany and France.
Take the walls now!
And this is Abarbanel, and her support of David Reuveni was actually the opposite of perhaps what he preached to the Christians, namely that his support, he would convince the Christians to go to some sort of battle with the Muslims in the Holy Land, which would ultimately cause the Muslims to defeat the Christians. Remember, at this point in history, if you were a Jew and you want to be learning Torah undisturbed, and you want to practice your Judaism undisturbed, openly and in the public, go to the Ottoman Empire. Live with your Muslim friends. Italy, which was Christian, is also not bad. We know that Smyrna in Greece, the hottest place where things were going. My point is that there's a lot of messianic fervor going on within the Jewish world and within the world in general. Let's move now to the Christian world, because we have to understand this as well. Now, in the Christian world at the time, remember, in 1515, what happens? Martin Luther goes ahead and posts the Reformations. He puts nails on the church and hangs his tainas against the Catholic Church. Now, the Protestant Reformation is in full swing. So in the 1500s, you have a lot of things going on in Europe. So we have Pope Clement, he's in Rome. You have Charles V. Charles V is the Holy Roman Empire. Let's just read a little bit about Charles V just to get an idea about him. He's 1500 to 1558, the Holy Roman Empire. Plus, that's one title. Archduke of Austria, King of Spain, King of Sicily and Naples, Lord of the Netherlands, Duke of the Burgundy, head and heir to the House of the Habsburg. His dominions in Europe include all the countries of Germany, northern Italy, Austria, Spain, southern Italy, Naples, Sardinia. All of Spanish colonization in the Americas was his. Indeed, he chose the name Charles V because he was the modern-day Charlemagne. In his time, they used to say, the empire in which the sun never sets is the empire of Charles V. He was the most powerful person in the world, and but he has problems because in France you got Francis I, and France, they're both Catholic, and they don't like each other. The big machloikis between Francis I, that big Catholic country there in France, and then you got the big Catholic Holy Roman Empire, which again, its nucleus is Germany, but he's also King of Spain, he's also Lord of the Netherlands, he's also House of the Habsburgs, he's also got parts of Italy and Sicily and Naples and Sardinia. And then you got the Protestants. You got the Protestants who were making a lot of noise. And the Protestants are actually saying, you know what? Maybe we're going to support the Muslims. Maybe they're a little monotheistic, more monotheistic than you Catholics. Remember, the Catholics are always assumed to be idolaters. When Alfred E. Smith runs for the presidency, there's no way he can win. He's a Catholic. He's an idolater. Okay? It took till 1960 to Kennedy, who was a good Catholic. All right, Shlomo Biden wasn't the best Catholic. Okay, that was already now in the 21st century. But in the 1930s, there was no way a Catholic. And President Kennedy himself was asked, who's your allegiance to, the Pope or to the American Constitution? So Protestants that are making a lot of noise, and then you have also in England, don't forget Henry VIII. Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And he's trying to get rid of Catherine. He's trying to get rid of Catherine. He wants to annul the marriage there, which we're going to get to in a minute. So there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot, and there in the non-Jewish world as well. There's a lot of tumult. A lot of tumult going on. So he comes to the Pope. He comes to the Pope and he tells the Pope, I need ships, I need guns, I need warships, because I'm going to go to war with you. I have 300,000 Yidden. Now this whole thing is, by the way, smoke and mirrors. There is no 300,000 Jews. There is no empire called Chavor. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. I don't know what would have been. Where is this place? I don't know. CNN is sending reporters. There's nowhere to send them to. Where is this place, Chavor? Now you'll say, how can that be? It's a very easy how it's to be. Christopher Columbus in 1492 and sails the ocean blue. What's it? One of his. How did he get King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to go ahead and finance his trip? What's up this? He didn't have any money. Why would they go ahead and finance such mishigas? So everybody knows the Maisa, because he's going to make a shorter shipping route to the east. He's going to go ahead and go Spain, go over that way, the Atlantic, and soon, next thing you go, he's going to be in China. The next thing he'll be in China, and thus for us in China, it'll be a shorter route, and Spain will have more money. That's the famous. But there's another reason, you can look it up. The Grand Khan. There was this belief back then. And by the way, this belief wasn't so crazy. There was this belief back then, Prester John was this belief that was going on back then, that there must be some sort of Christian country hidden. Prester John was a mythical Christian patriarch and king. Stories popular in Europe in the 12th to the 17th century told of a Christian patriarch and king who was said to rule over a Christian nation amid the pagans and the Muslims somewhere in the world. Some people thought that it was in Central Asia. Eventually, Portuguese explorers came to believe that the term was a reference to Ethiopia because there was a small Christian enclave in Ethiopia. But my point is, there was this belief back then that there were all types of land were undiscovered. Remember, when Columbus is on his way, it's not like the El Al plane. We're going to be over the Atlantic in 12 hours, you'll be landing in New York. He was sure he got wherever, to the West Indies. He was sure he got to China, wherever he thought he was going. All of a sudden he bumps into the Caribbean. He didn't think there was North America. Let's say he didn't think there was a North America. So all of a sudden, he comes back and he says, hey, guess what? There's a big place over there. There's a big place there, North America, South America. There's a lot of people there. So therefore, for this guy to China, I'm from this place, Chavor, who knows? Maybe Columbus will hit one day Chavor. Meaning the world wasn't like now, the satellite photos showing what there is in Gaza, what there's not in Gaza, satellite photos showing what's in North Korea, what's not in North Korea, when he eats lunch, when he doesn't eat lunch. It wasn't like that back then. People traveled the world and you never know what you would pop up with. And like I said, there was this belief. Now, by the way, even in Jewish belief, what was the Jewish Prester John? What was that? Aseres HaShvatim. By the way, that's a big belief even later on in the times of the Vilna Gaon, to this day, by the way. There's this belief that one of the prerequisites for the coming of the Mashiach, we're going to relocate the 10 lost tribes. The 10 lost tribes, the Aseres HaShvatim, which are on the river Sambatyon, some sort of mythical river somewhere, like the Jewish Prester John, that's meaning people back then. So you have a lot of things tummeling. You have the Muslims, practically, the Muslims and the Christians are fighting each other. They're fighting each other for who's going to win, who's going to be world dominion. That's going on. And everybody is religious at that point. Everybody is religious. And everybody's religion is telling them this is the Mashiach Zeit. This Muhammad's going to come down again, and Jay is going to come down again, and the Aseres HaShvatim are going to come down again, and Mashiach is coming down again. Everybody's coming down. And then you had all these beliefs going on. There's Prester John, and he's going to come, the Aseres HaShvatim. And then there's the Grand Khan that Columbus is going to find, and that's going to be some mythical nation that's also going to help the Christians. So a lot of things going on. So when he went to the Pope, and this guy says, I'm a general with 300,000 men, it wasn't so crazy. His book constantly, besides that there's women issues, I don't want to get into that, but he's constantly fasting. What he really fasted, he didn't fast, I don't know. But Lamais is constantly saying, I fasted 6 more days, 8 more days, 7 more days, always fasting. But anyway, the Kitzer, he gets a letter from the Pope. The Pope tells him, I'm not your man, but your man is the King of Portugal, King John of Portugal. Now we look at Portugal. What's Portugal? What's a little teeny country, Portugal? Who even lives there? Anybody know anyone who lives from Portugal? But Portugal then was a world power. Was the world power. The Portuguese Empire stretched all the way into Africa, like they were the one who found Ethiopia. The Portuguese fleet, the Portuguese Armada, Magellan, all the craze. Well, it was a huge thing, Portugal. So they tell him to go to Portugal, and he gives him a letter. The Pope gives him a letter with his Askom, he says, I don't know, Efsher, perhaps this guy is Taka Emes. So he goes to Portugal, and Vaita with his entourage, with his horses, with his white robes, with his flags, with the Decalogue, with the Aseres and Nimris, waving his flags, everything is Gavaldic, with white turbans and this, everything, and Mashiach. He comes to Portugal, and what does he do when he gets to Portugal? He meets with the King of Portugal, and he says, and listen, Mr. King, I need 300 cannons. Like Israelis come, we need the B-2 bombers, and we need bumper busters. We need that. We need totachim. We need guns. We need missiles. I need ships. And the King of Portugal says, I don't know, maybe, could be, maybe it should be, maybe it should not. And now, by the way, just to add on, I mentioned he was charismatic. People are going ahead and getting excited about him. Some people claim a lot of people are doing tshuva. Like I said, he went ahead and he says that I'm going to rebuild Mizbeach. In fact, he writes in his diary that you know who he meets when he's in Rome? He meets over Ravadia Sforno. The Sforno on the Chumash. Ba'osim yom shiyasa barome higia b'levaya shloshi b'rashi kehila Ravadia me Sforno. Ravadia Sforno comes, and he wants to look at the letters from the Pope. You know what Reuveni does? Reuveni has him arrested. Then he gets him out, he frees him. If you look in this Sforno, in Parshas, I believe it's Parshas Vayechi, Birkas Yankov, when they talk about Lo Yosef Shevim Yehuda B'choikim L'Grein Karav, Ad She'avo Shilo Vo Yichas Amin. On that pasuk there, I believe it's that pasuk, after a different pasuk. But over there, the Sforno goes on a long discussion of what's meant Mashiach. And this guy, I forgot his name now, he claims that refers to this incident, that the Sforno was arrested by Reb Dovid Reuveni. The kids though, it's a lot of tumult. There's a lot of tumult going on in the Jewish people. And obviously, Jews are always excited about Mashiach. Rabbi Yitzchok Cohen, I don't know why, he wrote a whole history book about what's going on in Spain and Portugal at that time. A Frum Yid in Hebrew. You can see it, it's on Hebrew books. It's called Divrei Hayomim L'Malkei Tzarfas. Interesting book. Anyway, in there he writes, Vayomru ish al re'eu go'aleinu hu ki Hashem shalchehu. He is our Redeemer, God has sent him. So he comes to the King of Portugal and he says, I need ballistic missiles, I need B-2 bombers, I need bunker busters, I need all this stuff, I need it right now. Now, as you can imagine, just like nowadays, you have Marjorie Green, you have Tucker Carlson, don't give them missiles. You have those that say, yeah, and then you have those that say, Lindsey Graham says, yeah, give them missiles. The Portugal king was under pressure to give, don't give. He didn't outright say he's a bad guy, but he kept stalling. Like in the Portuguese advisor there, Lindsey Graham, whoever had Trump's ear at that time, whoever had the Portugal ear, so one said yes, one said no. But what's going on in Portugal now? Now listen, 1525, 1492 is the Inquisition in Spain. That meant on Tisha B'Av 1492, the Yidden had a choice. You either leave or you convert. Leave or you convert. Choice in your hand. Barbanel claims 300,000 converted, only 10,000 left. Others claim much different. It was half-half. Whatever it was a bad matzah. Most of the Jews ran to Portugal. It's the same Iberian Peninsula. They just went ahead and they moved west to Portugal. The problem was in 1497, the King of Portugal said, now you gotta be a Christian, you gotta be a Catholic. No leaving, just Catholic. They said, well, Seppus, we came here 5 years ago because you let us. I said, yeah, I did, but I changed my mind. No, and you can't leave either. Obviously, some did leave, they paid, but Lamaisa, you can't leave. 1497, everybody in Portugal, you have to become a Christian, a Catholic, and that's it. Now, all of a sudden, now, the Inquisition is not in Portugal. By the way, just that I assume people know, but just in case you don't, the Inquisition, I don't know if everyone knows this, the Inquisition is one purpose only. Those to strayed Christians. That was the whole Inquisition, means to question, to be inquisitive. Basically, it was the religious police. I mean, imagine in Passaic, they're going to make the tefillin police. They're going to go ahead and find everyone really putting on tefillin every day. We're going to go ahead and sneak in. Is anybody slipping away really secretly that they tell their wives they're going to Minyan, and then they go out to Bagel Munch and they come home and they just rub their hands a little, that make believe they have the stripes on their hands, but really they're not putting on tefillin. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put these people on the rack. Are you putting on tefillin? Are you putting on tefillin? Not. So that's what the Inquisition was strayed Christians, meaning basically they believed that they were Yidden and Muslims, by the way. But for our purposes, we just weren't the Yidden. That they were Jews who really weren't, we know they were. They weren't Emistika Christians, they were fake Christians. So the Inquisition was to try to focus and to get these people to get back on track. The Kitzer, he's a real Jew. He's not a Converso, he's not a Marano, and he's allowed into Portugal as a Yid. Like nowadays, there's always exceptions to the rules. For instance, there were a whole bunch of Moroccan Jews who were in Portugal. What's that? Because the Portuguese try to have these Moroccan colonies. Jews were the traders, and they didn't speak the North African language. So they were Jews who had permission. A Jew will say, finagles this way, that way, whatever. There were Jews who were living there. So it was not airtight. But still, it was a big thing. So the Kehilat HaAnusim, the Anusim, the forced Jews, those forced conversos who were forced to be Jews, they were the one, it became a whole tumult. The Mashiach Zolkumen, the Mashiach has come. Mashiach, Dovid Reuveni, and they gathered around him. There were no shuls open anymore, but he opened the shul in his house, davening, and because, like I said, what was the svara? What was the Svara? The Svara is Pashut. The Svara, the other is Pashut. If he came to the Portuguese king and he said, I have 300,000 Gewaldige soldiers, I have 300,000 armed great soldiers, so Lamaisa, and we're going to defeat the Muslims, and you're going to get back Christendom back into the Eretz Yisrael, and not only that, my port city, they're really in Jeddah. Ooh, Jeddah, I know where that is. That's only a day's journey from Mecca. We're going to take down Mecca itself. Ooh, we're going to take down the Holy Grail of Mecca. So therefore, Lamaisa, there's a svara which works in this day. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's how life is this day. What happens? There were two terrible people. One was named Hitler, Yamach Shmoy v'Zichro Adol Meyad. The other one named Stalin, Yamach Shmoy v'Zichro Adol Meyad. Lamaisa, they both hated England. They both hated the capitalists. One was a fascist. One was a communist. What's the difference? What's the hillock? We hate capitalists. We hate England. We hate America. So all of a sudden, in 1940 or 39, whatever it was, the Ribbentrop-Molotov plan, and afterward. And then Stalin and Roosevelt become chaverim. Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. Everyone hated Stalin's guts. He hated their guts. Oh, but what can you do? My enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's what he said. He said, Reuveni, ich bin the enemy of your enemy. I hate Muslims, you hate Muslims. So what am I Yid? So he entertained them. Now we get to the, I don't want to say hero. He's not a hero in my book. But whatever he is, he's an interesting Yid. There's a man named Shlomo Molcho. Shlomo Molcho, his name is Diego Pires. Diego Pires, regular Spanish guy, Portuguese guy. He's born in 1500. That means he was born a Catholic. Because his parents, in 1492, his parents came to Portugal. And in 1497, the king of Portugal said, now you're going to go into the baptismal pool, and you're going to become a Catholic. So when he's born in 1500, he's born a full-fledged Catholic. But Lamaisa, he knows he's a Yid. He knows he's a Yid. The Inquisition started in Spain in 1492. This meant they started to clamp down on the Jews. The Jews officially had to start converting like 1391. 1492 was sort of like that was the deadline. The Inquisition in Portugal doesn't start till 1536, which means the time from 1497 to 1536, which is a while, almost 40 years, there's no Inquisition. There are many who claim, some say yes, some say no, nobody knows for real. But one thing is for sure, the king of Portugal wasn't such a makpid gomor that if he saw a Yidel in the street and the Yidel said, Baruch Hashem, he didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't send him to the rack, because there was no rack. It wasn't so bad. There are those who claim that if he knew that the Yiddish was teaching his kid Shema Yisrael at the house, he didn't care, he looked away. Some say he did care, some say, what is clear, there was no inquisition. There was no formal way of going ahead of enforcement, which was in Spain. Changed in 1536. That's important to recognize. That's also why Reuveni can come. Reuveni comes, and all the Anusim are gathering around him, and they're saying, oh, well, Mashiach's will come, and here's Mashiach, this is great. And one guy in particular, this guy, our good friend, not a friend, but Diego Pires, he is mamish. This guy, Diego Pires, let's talk about him for a minute. The year is 1525. He's 25 years old. You know what he does for a living? He is... some say he's like Ilana Kagan, that he's mamish on the Supreme Court. I don't think he's mamish on the Supreme Court, but let's just say he's a clerk of Ilana Kagan. That's a choshev izach, right? There was a guy here in Shul, he was a clerk of some federal judge somewhere. That's a choshev job to be a clerk. Portuguese king had this like Supreme Court, and he was up there. He went to university. He was Taka Malumid. He was a smart guy. He was at 25 to be Ilana Kagan's secretary, the secretary of Chief Justice Roberts, even better. So that's who he was. And he meets this guy, Dovid Reuveni, and he says, wow, this is gewaldig. And then he claims, again, I have to tell you, part of this whole story is, again, I know what I'm about to tell you now, if anybody would say it now in the room, unfortunately, we'd send you to Bellevue. I realized that some people, I don't know, Chanya might know what that means. When I was a kid, everyone knew Bellevue went, unfortunately, it was a hospital for people who had mental challenges. Now people don't know. But they would send you to a psychiatric institution. If you went ahead and you said you had visions, if you went today and you got up and you said, I had a vision last night that God came to me in a dream and told me I'm Mashiach, We would send you off to the psych ward. Lamaisa, back then, it was okay. It was okay. It was okay to say you had visions. It was okay you had visions. And he meets this guy, Dovid Reuveni. He meets a full-fledged Yid, and he knows his parents used to be Yid. He thinks he's a Yid. He not thinks he's a Yid. He goes to Dovid Reuveni. He goes, "Oh, Rabbi, ich bin a Yid. And Dovid Reuveni says, "Shh, be quiet. What are you doing? You're going to spoil the whole thing." Because the worst thing that could be is that even though there's no Inquisition, if they find out that he's trying to reconvert the Yidden back from Catholicism to Judaism, then his whole scheme is up. The only scheme up is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But he has to be the enemy. All of a sudden, if he's going ahead and converting Jews, he's not the enemy of my enemy anymore. He's my enemy. So he can't, don't tell anyone about that. The Kitzer, he goes to sleep, the Molcho, he goes to sleep, and Nachamo, he claims he has a vision, he has a big vision, and in the vision, it goes ahead and it tells him in the vision that, you know what, I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that you don't have a bris milah, is that you're a goy. Now, okay, maybe they could teach them Shema Yisrael, Aleph Beis, but to have a bris milah, that you can't have anymore. Bris milah was outlawed. You can't do that, that's for sure. So he didn't have a bris milah. So he said, this is why Dovid Reuveni doesn't like me. I'm an Orel. I'm not a circumcised person. I'm not a real Yid. Now, there's a lot of evidence. Two things. There's evidence that Lemaisa, that people believed. Now, there's no doubt Molcho felt Reuveni was Mashiach. A lot of people thought he was Mashiach. Already in Venice, they thought he was Mashiach. In Rome, there were Jews thought he was Mashiach. Now that he's in Portugal and Lisbon, Vadere, people think the Anusim think he's Mashiach. But there was a belief from the Maranos that if you're uncircumcised, you can't be Makabel Pnei Mashiach. Part of the Tanai to recognize Mashiach is that you have to have a bris milah. That's Aleph. Beis is that we know, nowadays, we know that if you're born of a Jewish mother, if you're a male or a female, and you're born of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew. Whether you have a bris milah or you don't have a bris milah, you're a Jew. There are thousands and tens of thousands of Yidden who came out of Soviet Russia in 1989, in 1990, in 1991, and they had a bris at 20, at 30. Not a pleasant experience, I can imagine. But you have it, you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do. But they were Jews. They were Jews. They didn't come out and they said, I'm not a Jew. Make me a Jew. He apparently, again, it's not so clear if the Anusim thought, since they converted and they didn't have bris milah, could be they even thought he wasn't a Yid. Hard to know. Bekitzer, he goes and he says to Dovid Reuveni, I need a bris milah, because I know that's right. So Reuveni says, what, you're out of your mind? You're crazy. That's going to ruin the whole plot. Especially if the guy was just a faker and the whole thing was a joke anyway. Probably just, I don't know what he eventually wanted, by the way. Nobody knows exactly. Was he a real mamin and he really thought that he would bring Mashiach, or he was just a faker and he wanted the money and the ships and he would go ahead and sell it on the black market and he was an arms trader? I don't know what he really was. Who knows what he wanted? But Lemaisa, he knew one thing. What he wanted was that he wanted no part of Shlomo Malcho's bris. That's for sure. That I can't have. So Shlomo Molcho goes ahead and says, you know what? I'll do a bris. I do a bris. I heard that Abraham, our father Abraham, did a bris himself. If he can do it, I can do it. So he went ahead and he did a bris on himself. He said the following, Yiru l'cho ha-moros ha-noros ashar taroeh. The angel, they had these people called Magidim. I don't know what they were exactly. I don't know. It sounds psychiatric. This Magid, this spirit, spoke to him and said to him, Ma taroeh, and he says, Ani roeh, ulai eincha rotze legalot li hadavar acha se bris milah. I chap, Mr. Magid, Mr. Celestial Angel. You're not going to tell me what's doing until I have a bris milah. I got it. So what did he do? This he writes himself, Shlomo Molcho. Halachti meitoi, that when he had to do in the night, and the whole Shaila, by the way, can do bris milah at night. V'balayla asisi bris milah al yadi. Oh my gosh, at 25 years old, take a knife to yourself, no anesthesia. I don't know how it's possible. Even HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to give Abraham a hand. How did he do this? I don't know. Ein ish iti. I did it privately at night. It's unbelievable. Lissy writes, Tsar godol ke'ev hirgashti, v'nisalafti. I fainted. Ki adam shoses kemaya novea. The blood was flowing like a flowing river. Oh my gosh, what's going on?
However, harachaman, hirpeh, haroifa, riposi, thank God he recovered from his, it sounds suicidal, but Bekitzer, he went ahead, lo yuman ki yusupar. No one will ever believe this maisa, but I guess it happened. When I recovered from my self-surgery, halachti al mori Rabbi Dovid. Now it's been a real yid. I have to go ahead, I have to change my name. So he said, you know what? What am I going to name myself? So Lamaisa, I know that Reb Dovid's father is Shlomo. So I'm also going to be like his brother, a ben Shlomo. So my first name will be Shlomo. I'll be a Shlomo. Oh, but what's going to be my last name? So he thought, and his vision came to him, and he said, the pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. Shmuel Aleph Chav Beis is Nun Aleph. We say it in benching. Migdol Yeshuos Malkai V'Yoseh Chesed L'Mishvicho L'Dovid. Meaning, first of all, it's wrong that we call him Molcho. Really, his name is Malko. If you know the pasuk, the pasuk is Migdol Yeshuos Malko. There's a patach under the mem. But he said, Migdol Yeshuas Malko, Hashem will do Yeshuas LeMalko when he does chesed LeMashiach, when he does chesed to his Mashiach. Who's the Mashiach? LeDavid. Dovid a Reuveni. So therefore, I'll become Shlomo Malchai. He gives himself a new name after the bris. Ich bin Shlomo Malchai. And that's it. And Dovid comes back to Dovid Reuveni. And he says, guess what? Ich bin a real yid. I'm a real yid with a bris milah. Nobody, a great yid. And Dovid Reuveni says, get away from me. Now the gig is up. The gig is up. Dovid Reuveni says, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And he is convinced that this is all part of the plan. He writes in his diary, he says, Dovid Reuveni said, why did you put me in danger? It'll become known to the king. What's going to be? Everything's going to be ruined. And kachavi. But Lamaisa Shlomo Malcho never is dissuaded from believing be'amuna shlema that Dovid Reuveni is Mashiach Tzidkenu. There's no doubt in his mind, and this is all part of the plan. But Bekitzer, he's right, Reuveni. The king finds out, versteht sich, that the Ilana Kagan's secretary got a bris milah, and that's a terrible zach. And bye-bye, and Lamaisa and Molcho has to run away. He has to give up his pension, give up his salary. He wants to run away anyway. Now I want to be a good yid. He runs away, and Reuveni is also stuck. Then the king of Portugal says no ballistic missiles, no B-2 bombers. 1525 to 1530, we put Dovid Reuveni on the shelf. Now center stage is Shlomo Molcho. So Shlomo Molcho, he goes ahead and he goes to Italy. There were parts of Italy were still pretty friendly to Jews. From 1525, when he has his bris milah, till 1530, when he comes back, 1531, when he comes back to Rome. Those 5 years, one thing is clear. He learned a lot. You say what Mark Twain said, like when he was 9 years old, he couldn't believe how little his father knew. When he became 20, it's amazing how much the old man learned in the last 10 years. Lamaisa, he eventually ends up in Salonika. Salonika is the Kabbalistic capital of the world. Who is in Salonika? So Rosh V'Rishonim is the Maritatz. The Maritatz is in Salonika. He is the Rebbe of many people. He was a big gadol. But more importantly for our story are two people. One is Reb Shlomo Alkabetz. I think he wrote L'cha Doidi, right? He wrote L'cha Doidi. And Rosh HaRishonim, of course, is Rav Yosef Karo. Rav Yosef Karo was in Salonika. Now again, we don't have the passport visas. We don't have timestamps on CCTV. We don't have any of this. When did he leave? But at the end, Shlomo Alkabetz and the Maritatz and Yosef Karo, they all go to Eretz Yisrael. One thing is for sure, by 1530, 1533, at the end, they're all in Sfas. He's in Salonika. And at that point, if you remember, he's it. What can I tell you? He's definitely it. He's giving drushes. This teeny little book here, you can get it for $10, little teeny book. The book ends on page 105, and the book's introduction ends on page 57. So anyway, but the book is called Chayes Kana. He writes about himself in the third person. Avahi bayamim Rabbi Mahem, and it was in those times. He writes as if like he's a Navi. Haya ish Yudi. There was this Yudi, And he goes ahead and he said, and first he writes about Dovid Reuveni, and he writes, and Vayomer Elav, Ivri Anochi, then he writes about himself, Ivri Anochi, I'm an Ivri, and he goes ahead and he writes about himself that when he comes in and he says that, I don't know a thing. Lo yadati ba'uma, lo yadati Shlomo. He says, I didn't know anything. And he said, I never learned, I never knew anything. And then in a dream, everything came to me. Everything that I have to know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'man Shmo came to me. And he went ahead and he taught me all these things. I saw an Ish Zaken Nichbad, all these chalomas. And he says, all the secrets of the Torah are revealed to me. Ani betumi holech, v'gomer ragli omedes v'meishur. All of a sudden this malach comes to me and says, Odicha, I'll tell you, ma nu'alei maros b'chalom, what exactly happened. Kisham hiruni kol hadvarim asidim lavo alai, val kol dvarim asidim l'schadesh b'imai, l'famim anari ate yeshivas chachamim sforim psuchim l'fneim, oskim b'torah v'osim asamatin perushim psukim b'kitzur. I don't want to go too much to Hebrew. He writes that I saw everything. Meaning, basically, he was no amelis b'torah. Everything that Litvish Judaism stands for, he didn't. He had no amelis b'torah. He just fell asleep, and voila, like the malach in the first 40 days when you're a baby, whatever it was. Except nobody put him on the lip. That's it. He never writes that he stood and he studied Leilos Kiyamim. He put his feet in the cold water. Didn't know a Moshe Feinstein story. None of that as well. Just went to sleep, and voila, he became a great big tzaddik. And apparently it worked, because all of a sudden he comes back to Rome. He comes back to Rome in 1531, and he, first of all, he puts out a sefer. You can look at the sefer. I don't know if it's on Hebrew books, but in Mistama, you can find it somewhere. It's called Sefer HaMefarah. Sefer HaMefarah. If you understand one thing about it, you're lucky. But whatever, we'll tell you, whatever, it's not your regular type of sefer. It's an interesting, there's some, even the Vortlach there are interesting. Anyway, he puts out the Sefer HaMefarah, and he writes there in the Sefer HaMefarah, Mashiach is all coming in 1540, and he's the Mashiach, and Reb Dovid is the Mashiach. He says the following: he comes to Rome, and he puts on beggar's clothing, and he goes to sit among the lepers by the river Tigris, right by the Vatican. Sounds like somebody else, right? Sounds like a different religion. It says, Ki ish machoyves v'yodea choyli asher ein bo misom. But actually, truthfully, you're all familiar. The Gemara there in Sanhedrin. Where's the Gemara in Sanhedrin? Sadiches. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Sadiches. Gemara in Sanhedrin Sadiches has a lot of the Gemaras there talking about Mashiach there. So the Gemara says, Heicha Yosef. Heicha Yosef. I'll read it in English. They asked one of the rabbis of the Talmud, where is the Messiah sitting? Elijah said to him, Elijah is Eliyahu Navi. Elijah said to him, at the entrance of the city of Rome. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi then asked Elijah, and how will I identify him? How can I recognize him? Elijah answered Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he sits among the poor who suffer from illnesses. All of them untie their bandages and tie them at once, but the Messiah unties one bandage and ties one at a time. Perhaps I will be needed to serve, therefore I never tie more than one bandage at a time. That's what it says. Yosef Beini Bapischa Deraimi. He's sitting in Rome, and that's what he does. Shlomo Molcho goes and he sits by the thing of Rome, and he goes ahead and he makes himself a flag. When he signed his name, he always put his little flag. He also had a flag, a lot of flags. He had flags. On his flag, there's other stuff written there. He had flags, and he goes ahead and he goes to Pope Clement, and he says, "This is it. This is it. We got a Reuveni, me and Reuveni." And he says like this, he says, we're going to go ahead, we're going to bring Mashiach. And he says the following. He says, Ani Mashiach ha'asid legolas Yisrael. He says, I'm Mashiach. And Dovid Reuveni is Mashiach. Dovid Reuveni now became his Navi. Now he became the second in command. Kitzur, they go to Pope Clement, and they say, now the problem over here is, quickly we'll do this there. The problem over here with things like Pope is the following. And just to go ahead and to recognize, because this is just to get the story a little bit exciting here, to make the story a little bit exciting, so if it's not exciting enough. But Pope Clemens, like I said, Pope Clemens, like nowadays also, people always say the Pope says stop the war in Gaza, make a ceasefire, but really who cares? Yeah, who cares? I mean, he said, maybe he's a good guy, maybe he's not. He's from Chicago. I don't know. They say his brother is a MAGA guy. I don't know. But Lamaisa, what difference does it make what Pope Leo says, what Pope Leo doesn't say? What's the chiluk? He's not anything. He has no army. There's no papal force. But even back then, in the 1500s, he wasn't the guy with all the cards. He had none of the cards. To be honest with you, he had few of the cards. The big cards was by Charles V. Charles V, he had the cards. He was the head of the Roman Empire. I remember in 1527, Rome was sacked. Rome was sacked and Rome was pillaged. So when that's why Reuveni comes back. Reuveni comes back in 1530 because the Pope is on his last legs. It's terrible. Rome is in ruins. There's nothing. You can't get a minion. It's bad shape. It's bad going on there. So my sense, that's why Reuveni comes back. The Pope is very weak now. So he figured now it's a good time, him and Reuveni, whatever they're going to do, they're going to do. Lamaisa, there's a problem there. Why there's a problem over there? Because there's a Yid, Yaakov Mantino. This guy, Yaakov Mantino, he is on the Beis Din of Rome. And when he was on the Beis Din of Rome, there was a famous king of England, Henry VIII. Henry VIII, he had 6 wives, a busy man, 6 wives, not all at once. He was married to Catherine. Catherine originally was married to Charles's brother. And then Charles's brother had gestorben, he died, but unkind, he had no children. So Lamaisa now, according to the Deuteronomy law, is she mutter le'eshes achiv. Is she mutter le'eshes achiv? Is she mutter, is Catherine mutter to her deceased brother's, her deceased husband's brother? Just meant Charles V. Is it Yibum? Just meant a mitzvah? Or is it us? It's a whole shaila. It was a whole shaila, the whole Europe. So he married her. They asked Pope, whatever, the Pope, the first Pope who was there, a different Pope, whatever, he paskins, it's just mutter. They died without kids, no kids, mutter. She maybe had a miscarriage, it doesn't matter, she had kids, it was mutter. They got married. But he didn't like Catherine. Catherine was a problem. Problem was she didn't bail him any male children. He didn't like that. Henry VIII needed some male children. He had a thing, I'm going to annul the marriage. Catholics are not allowed to get divorced. Oh, but you can get the marriage annulled. So he goes ahead and he calls his friend Clement VII, the Pope. Who do you go to? You go to the Rav Roshi to get a heter. Go to Rav Roshi, get a heter. So he goes to Clement and he says, Clement, I need an annulment of this marriage. You got to be. I want to afkinen lekadushin. I want to love mafreya. I want to be mafkiya the kedushin. I want to have kosh to kedushin. He said it was an usher marriage. Really, they really had a secret kid. And it was not a good marriage. I was usher to marry her. So therefore, I got to get rid of her. And also, by the way, when he was doing this, he was having a good time with some woman, Anne Boleyn. But still, he needed a queen. So he goes to Clemens. So he gets to Clemens is a bad state. He's got his long beard. He's ready. Well, it was a shtickle of a tzbrach and a guy who was a little not in good shape. So he didn't know what to do, Clemens. So Clemens said, what do you do in your prom? You ask a Yid. What else do you do? So he went to the Beis Din of Rome. He went to the Beis Din of Rome, and he asked a Shaila. He asked Shaila from Yaakov Mantino. Yaakov Mantino was the Erste Dayan on the Roman Beis Din. And then he also asked the Zweite Dayan, who is Eliyahu Menachem Halfan. That was his big mistake. Big mistake is he asked 2 rabbis a question. I always tell people when they call me, they go, I already asked Rabbi so-and-so. I go, then I'm hanging up. Whatever the rabbi said is good. But they said it's mutter, then it's mutter. They said it's asa, then it's asa. Whatever that rabbi said is right, I'm leaving out. I'm hanging up the phone. So that's it. He didn't do that. He didn't hang up the phone. He called 2 rabbis. For Shteitzach, he got 2 opinions. He got, what's his name? Mantino said to him, you can't annul the marriage. It's a mitzvah daraisa. It's takayibam, Deuteronic law. It's the yibam. But then he also says halfan. Right, there was a heter. You couldn't annul the marriage. Now the problem was that everybody was related. All the popes and the kings and the queens. Everyone's related. So it happened to be Catherine's nephew was Charles V. Charles V was the head of the Holy Roman Empire. Who sacked Rome in 1527? Charles V. He had to pay 600,000 ducats to get back to Rome. Now, dos haste, you're going to go ahead and get rid of my aunt. Charles V called up Clemens on the phone. I don't care if you're a rabbi or anything. Well, rabbi, shmabbi, pope. I don't care about that. You're not going to get rid of my aunt. My aunt is married to Henry VIII, and she's going to remain married to Henry VIII until they die together in Gan Eden. That's it. You don't annul any marriage. What are you, crazy, Mr. Meshuggah? Go like Montino. Montino said it's usher to marry. The marriage is chal. It's usher to annul. And Lamaisa and Chalfin. Now the problem was, and Chalfin went ahead but Chalfin was pushing you could annul. Problem was that Chalfin was one. I told you it was Yesh V'Yesh. Chalfin was where our friend, where Shlomo Molcho lived. Shlomo Molcho lived in Rome by Chalfin. Chalfin was a supporter of Molcho. So Montino found out. Montino hated Chalfin because Chalfin was undermining him. I'm the Av Beis Din of Rome. One thing rabbis don't like when other rabbis disagree with them, they don't like that, rabbis. They don't like it at all. So Lamaisa said he hated Chalfin. Montino didn't like Chalfin. Now, face the right, and the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So Malcho's your friend. He's also he's a faker. He's a fallacious. He's a faker altogether. So he went ahead and he was malshin to Pope Clemens. Get rid of this guy Malcho and his sidekick Reuveni. They're both Meshuggahim. They're Chalfin friends. They're Chalfin friends. They wanted you to go ahead and announce the annulment. They wanted you to annul the marriage. Annul the marriage? King Charles is going to throw you back into the river and ransack Rome again. Haki, you're right. Goodbye Reuveni, Shalom Aleichem Reuveni. Goodbye Malcho, go away. And therefore Montino made sure that Malcho was a persona non grata by Clement VII. And by the way, this whole thing you should know, an interesting side note, Clemens went ahead and he paskined against Henry VIII. He paskined against Henry VIII. You got to say, bleibt marriage. You got to bleibt marriage with Catherine. So you know what he did? He found another rabbi, found a cardinal, a place in England. And then he went ahead and he passed his own law. And then you know what he did? He made his own religion. He said, those are a new religion. The Protestant Anglican Church of England, yes, it's true, the Henry VIII, the reason the Anglican Church of England was born was because of Me'er Eliyahu Menachem Chalfin, because he paskined against Henry VIII, and he actually wanted him to allow him, because Clemens, because of the fear of Charles V, and Montino said he's right to not allow to annul the marriage, so Henry VIII said, I'll take my football and I'll make my own religion, and that's how the Church of England to this day, and that's why what is it called, the Bishop of Canterbury, whatever he's called, he's like an alternate pope. That's how the whole Canterbury, when the guy Charles became the king not long ago, that's the Canterbury place, that's how it all started. It all started because Montino paskined like Clemens VII, because of Charles V threats, and therefore he couldn't, and then he got rid of her anyway, but Lamaisa, that sent the Church of England. Anyway, so what are they going to do now? So Molcho and Reuveni are persona non grata, and Pope Clemens has nothing to do with them. What are they going to do? So in a last-ditch effort in 1531, going into the winter of 1532, they decide that they're going to go to Charles V himself. They're going to go to Charles V himself, to the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Charles V, and they're going to fix it. They're going to fix he's going to fix it. They'll go to Charles V, the most powerful person in the world. The most powerful person in the world. They're going to go ahead and they're going to tell him, I'm Molcho, I'm a tzaddik, I'm Mashiach Tzidkenu, and this is Dovid Reuveni, and he's got 300,000 men, and you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make this big war, this big milchama, and remember, he's sitting. Charles V is sitting. He's got Francis I in France, who's always wanting to go to war with him. So he's got that on his head. He's got the Protestant Reformation that they're saying everyone should be a Protestant on the other head. He's got Henry VIII going ahead and yelling at him, and he's married to Catherine. His aunt is married to Henry VIII. What kind of marriage is that? Terrible marriage. She doesn't like my own Aunt Molly, Aunt Catherine. So he's got a lot of problems. So he may be open to the suggestion of 300,000 Yidden. The reality is Israelis were buying oil even after the Iranian Revolution. Israel continued to buy oil from Iran. They felt they could make a deal with Charles V. The Kitzer, they come to Charles V, and he's in Regensburg in Germany in 1532 with their Gewaltige plan, which they're sure is going to happen. They were from Yidden. They were religious people observant Maminim of Hashem, that's for sure. That they thought that there'll be a curse on both their homes. I mean, the Catholics will fight the Muslims and with the Protestants, and all three will collapse. And then the Yidden will come out on top, meaning without the army, on an army. They'll stand on the side, and like people were saying, like even now, maybe Iran and the place will go to war with him, and that's what they thought. Kids said they go to Charles V, and Charles V said, "What do? You crazy? You're Reuveni, you're just Stam a Jew. Stam a Jew is a nothing. The only Jew he ever needed was Rosenheim. He used to lend him money. He was a rich Jew. That's the only reason he ever needed a Jew in Germany, because he had some money. Besides that, he hated Jews. And this guy, Molcho, is the worst of the worst. He's a Marano, worse than a Marano. He's a rebellious Marano. He went back to being a Yid. You gave yourself a bris milah. It's crazy. Remember, he was king of Spain too. Spain, the Inquisition is going strong. There are parts of Italy the Inquisition was ready. Not all of it, not in Rome, not in Venice, but in Mantua there was, and he was head of Mantua too. So Charles V said, you guys are nuts, I'm not doing that. The kids they go to meet with the Charles V of Regensburg, and although we have the reports of the meeting, and he said, yes, of course, yes. And then after they left, he said, have these guys arrested immediately. In Regensburg, there was no Inquisition. It was a Catholic country, Germany, but there was no Inquisition. He had them transferred to Mantua, which is not far. It's only about 300 kilometers south into Italy, into northern Italy. And there, immediately on the 5th of Teves, 1532, Reb Shlomo Molcho was burnt at the stake. And the way it's described in the Sfarim, that the Goyim, they were so nervous, the Catholics were so scared about him, that they put a tape over his mouth that he couldn't talk. His flags and his shemos and his drushes, and by the way, the drushes that he used to give in Rome, even Christians came to the drush. He was a very charismatic guy, him and Reuveni. They must have been. If they had the ear of Pope Clemens and then the ear of the King of Portugal and Charles V, they had to be charismatic people. So they thought for sure he'd build some Shemus HaKadoshim and rumors that he once disappeared before and this and that. They tie him up, and the last thing they said, last chance, want to be a guy or not? He says the following, Libi mar v'zof, I'm upset that I ever was a goy. V'ata kitov beinechem tasu, do whatever you want to me. Nafshi tavshuva beis avia kinureya beis avia. He paraphrased the pasuk in 2 weeks ago's parsha Matas Masei, right by the Nedorim. Kinureya beis avia, I want to go back to my original youth homeland, Ki toivli oz me'ata. It was better being a Yid than being a guy. And they said, go ahead. They lit the flame, and that was it. He was burnt at the stake, and he died saying that he wanted to remain a Jew. The Inquisition, Reuveni couldn't be burnt, but he was a Yid. They didn't just burn Yid and Stam. So he was imprisoned, and by the way, eventually, they say in 1538, 6 years later, eventually he was burnt to stake history because he was the only, I doubt it was the only, but who knows, the only Jew ever burnt at the stake who was not a convert. The only Jew burnt on the stake of the Inquisition in the Order de Fe that was ever burnt who wasn't really a slipping Christian, he was a real Jew. Whatever it was, they both died. Bekitzer, you think that's the end? It's basically the end. See this interesting book called Toldos Simchas Torah. Toldos Simchas Torah. What are we talking about Simchas Torah and Tisha B'Av? Avraham Yari. He found out every minhag in the world that has to do with Simchas Torah. How they celebrate Simchas Torah in Africa, how they Simchas Torah in Teaneck, Simchas Torah in, not in Passaic, but all of that. But he tells you how they celebrate Simchas Torah in Prague. And you know who he's quoting from? He's quoting from the Tosfos Yantiv, Rabbi Yantiv Lipman Heller. He's the rabbi there in Prague, 1624. And he died in 1532. It's 100 years later. He writes the following. He's called the Tosfos Yantiv. He also wrote a parish on the Rush, on certain Masechtas, called the Lechem Chamudos, other things. He writes like this. When I was the Av Beis Din in Prague, I write to friend, there was a shul there, because Beis Knesses, the Pinkas, meaning either the guy's name was Pinchas or they kept the Pinkasim there, they kept the official logs there, whatever. Shayisi Ragi Obo, I used to sometimes daven. He was the Rav of the whole shtat. He would daven there. And he says, Yesh Arba Kanfus Mimesh, Yarok Kechelman. There are atzitzis there in Prague, in the shul, that are Yarok Kechelman. I don't know how to translate. Yarok can either be translated, in modern Hebrew it's green. Rabbinic Hebrew could be yellow. Chelmon is the yolk of an egg. The reason I don't know how to properly translate, if you made a hard-boiled egg and you make it the right way, the yolk remains yellow. If you let it sit in the pot, you don't care the yolk, you open it up, it's green. So it's hard to know what it means, the chelmon. They mean the chelmon, a chayes when it's runny and it's yellow. I mean chelmon when you overcook, a lot of people do that. They overcook their hard-boiled egg, they're green. Whatever it was yellow-green tzitzis made out of silk. Bekitzer, he says the clothes got there to Prague. By the way, Stav, if you're interested, you don't have to do it. But if you're interested, you go to Prague and you can see it yourself. It's still there. Not the tzitzis, but the Prague. Go to Prague Museum. There's in the Pinka Shul. No one's there. No one's hardly davening in Prague anymore. Not too many in there. It's like a graveyard like most of Europe. But you can see his kittel. There's this kittel, and the Pinkas Museum is made into a Jewish museum. If you're interested, you don't have to go to Prague, though. You can go online. Just the clothing of Shlomo Molcho in Prague, and you'll see all the nice pictures. Everything is there perfectly. The Kitzer, they have his tzitzis, his cloak, his tunic, whatever they have. But he said they had the tzitzis. We don't have the tzitzis anymore. Or if they don't show it. But he writes what would happen. He says, "V'hu shel HaKodesh Reb Shlomo Malcho Hashem Yikom Damo." Now, from the holy martyr Shlomo Malcho Hashem Yikom Damo, Od Shnei Dgolim Shalo. One flag is there. You go to Prague nowadays, you can go ahead. You can see the flag. You can see it. Look online. There's one flag there. And he said there were two flags at that time. And he says, V'gama kittel shalo. And he says that they would go ahead, Shemarim osam b'yom simchas Torah. Can you imagine that? Every simchas Torah, they would go ahead and they would take out Shlomo Malcho's tzitzis, maybe his kittel too, I don't know. They took it out and his degolim. And when they would march around with the Torahs, they would also march around with Shlomo Malcho's. That's what he says. That that they would go ahead, B'rak b'yom simchas Torah. And simchas Torah, they went ahead. That's one thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing I wanted to tell you is that this Sefer Lechem Chamudos, which is from Yontif Lippin Heller from 1630, he wrote a parish called Lechem Chamudos on the Rosh. You make your tzitzis, you have to have krichos, you have to have these loops. I don't know what to call it in English, krichos. When you wrap it around, the wrapper. So we do 7, 8, 11, 13, different minhagim, 7, 9, 11, 13, 7, 8, 11, 13, I think is what most people do. He went ahead, so he writes the Lechem Chamudos quotes this, that in the tzitzis of Shlomo Malcho, which is in Prague, they do Yud K Vav K, 10, 5, 6, 5. Yud K Vav K, 10, 5, 6, 5. That's how the krichas was. And believe it or not, it's quoted in the Mishnah Brura. It's quoted in the Mishnah Brura in Hilchot Tzitzis because the Magen Avram picks up on the Lechem Chamudos. Magen Avram is one of the classical perushim on the Orach Chaim. So he quotes in the Mishnah Brura, very heavily relied on the Magen Avram quite often in Ber Heitev. Shlomo Malcho appears in the Mishnah Brura. Again, honestly, the fact that they quote how he wears the tzitzis, I don't know if it means much. Nobody does it like that. Maybe some Sfardish didn't do it like that. Syrians do. Okay, fine, but somebody did it before that too. I don't know. Daniel Gladstein, very nice shiurim online. He says that he was at a chasana, and he remembered that day, he put on the tzitzis, and he saw that the strings, the krichos, the little wraparounds, weren't 7, 8, 11, 13. It wasn't the right way. Whatever was different. So he saw Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, I think, is the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das in Brooklyn. I think he's a Talmud of Rav Pam, Zechat Tzadik Levrocha. So he went over to Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. He said, "Oh, Rabbi, what do? Do I get my money back? It's a mekach toyis. I bought these new tzitzis, a new talis, and the krichas are wrong. What do I do?" He figured he'd ask the Rosh Yeshiva. So Rabbi Reisman said to him, "I once had the same shaila, and I went to Rav Pam Zechat Tzadik Levrocha. And you know what Rav Pam said? What did he say? What did he say? Rav Pam said, go open a Gemara and learn. What's the chiluk? What difference does it make? Nothing is ma'akiv anyway. It doesn't matter. It's 7, 8, 11, 13, 5, 6, 10, 9. The problem wasn't so impressed with the whole tumult of the Shaila. The kids from Isa, they both died. I know they call him a Kaddish. On the other hand, one could claim perhaps that he committed suicide. Reality was he didn't have to go to Regensburg. The only reason he died, Al Kiddush Hashem, was because he did this foolish thing of going to Charles V. Well, would I know the King Sum Young in North Korea to ask him for a favor? Am I Meshuggah? The whole thing is Meshuggah. He was living in Italy. If he was such a holy Jew, he could have been like the Rabbi Yosef Kauder or Shlomo Alkabetz. He could have lived in Tzfas and been one of the holy mystics. Vasepis, he went to this home Meshugas with the Dovid Reuveni, and then he was a shtickle of a suicide. On the other hand, like Mice, if you look up online now he became a Kaddish. If you look up on those yard site calendars, you look up Hey Tavis, you'll find Reb Shlomo Malcha, Hashem Yikom Damo, Hashem is a Kaddish. Again, if he is, like I said, they quote him here and there. Kavayosh, different pshatlach about, he has a pshat on the tainus, by the way, Teza tainus. So So the Gemara says that the schar you get on the tainus is the tzedakah. Is it tzedakah? Why is it tzedakah? So they say the food you give to the ani, that you save money today. You didn't go to the Lighthouse Cafe and have a big lunch. So the $20 you save from the Lighthouse Cafe, you give it to someone who doesn't have money. So he said tainus. He says this tat, this Rashi Tevis tat ani. Look at that tat ani. It's a nice word. Tanis. You have tats and tats. You have ani. I don't know if it doesn't make him a paisik either, and even as far as the tzitzis doesn't make him a paisik. Doesn't make a halak, whatever he was, he was. But Lamaisa, one thing I just want to add on is the following. In a book written by Moti Ben Melech, Moti Ben Melech is a lecturer from a Yid. He learned in the Gush, in the Haratzion, he's a good Yid. He has a PhD dissertation, and he put a book called Shlomo Molcho. You can read that. That's a nice book. You can read this book from Amazon, $20. 28 Dovid Reuveni, and get this for a few dollars, also not a big thing. But this book by Rabbi Hamburger, I have it personally inscribed by Binyamin Hamburger, the Meshiche HaSheker or Misnigdehem. Anyway, he has only one haskama. There's one haskama in the whole book. That haskama is from Shlomo Valbo. Shlomo Valbo lives here in the neighborhood, that's his grandson. So he writes, Meiri v'Rabban HaMashkiach of Shlomo Valbo. So in the Hesped, we'll end with this. He writes the following. He says, HaSefer Hishir Bi Reishim Az. I was very impressed by this book. It left a big impression on me. Lived impression. Why? Because Mitoicho Nachachti Shuv, I once again became aware, says Reb Shlomo Volba, Ad Heichan Magas Kmias Ameinu LeMashiach Tzidkeinu V'Chalat Hufas. You see how the Yidden, we want Mashiach so badly. However, there's a however here. You got to catch the however. However, we want Mashiach. Ad shekol mi sheyisyamer litol ha'atorah motza tamid rabim ma'oid shedavkubo. That any guy who picks up his flag and says, Ich bin Mashiach, you'll find people who are going to chase after him and say, yeah, Taki, right, you're Mashiach. Midei pam hayaze ba'lev tahor. Once in a while, there was a guy with a pure heart. Ki Reb Shlomo Molcho. It's Aleph Hey, Ayin Hey, Aleph Sham. Rubam bale chaloimos cholonim o shakranim. Most of these people are sick people or liars. Of course we want him. Bimhera v'yameinu. Aleinu lechakos b'savlonis. We do find the lesson in general is that, yeah, we have a balance. I understand there's a tension. I know we want Mashiach. Reality is today is Tisha B'Av. And we hope that Hashem, that we have a chazal that on the day of the lowest of lows also could be the highest of the high, that Mashiach could be born in that day. We have to be careful. We have to avoid falling prey to messianism, which frankly, even in this story, at the end of the day, whatever the messianism was, 2 Jews were killed, which l'chora ostensibly they didn't have to die. Besides, who knows? Again, there are those who claim that this also exacerbated and intensified, that just a few years later, they die in 1532, that 1536, the Inquisition begins in full in earnest in Portugal. Who knows? Reality is, away with a sense of normalcy, away with a sense of balance. And Bez Shem, I continue to do mitzvos, listening to the Chachmei Hador, the Meiravein and Mashiach Tzidkeinu, the true Mashiach should be Megala to us very quickly. The last Tisha B'Av we have to observe. And Bez Shem, next year in Yerushalayim. Thank everyone for listening and for those online as well.